Ciao, nice to meet you. As I said already in the other videos, I made this series as a refresher for the parents of the children who come on Sundays to the Art for Children gallery here in Da Nang, and afterwards they want to play chess in the tea shop downstairs. My name is Robbie and I make exhibitions, develop educational projects and do guiding. Hence my tendency to tell a bit more than is strictly necessary. And as I stated in the previous videos, there are also many good female players, but for practical reasons I use the he form. So this last video is about how to play when you're just starting. In the beginning this is always difficult, because what should we play? In any case, don't play very well known or recommended openings. On the one hand, because the other person is in general more experienced, so he also knows those openings, but better than you. So he said, oh, thank you. On the other hand, if the other person doesn't know that opening, he probably doesn't play the moves you learned. And then what should you answer on his wrong moves? So almost everyone who wants to learn chess looks around in books or on the internet to see how that information can help you further. Well, when I studied educational science more than 40 years ago, I did a practical assignment to research chess books for beginners, and it was a very sad situation then. When I look around in bookshops on the internet now, then I see that there are today excellent books and videos, but unfortunately some old and wrong customs still survive, but in a more beautiful package. The big problem is that the old methods are mainly based on memorization instead of understanding. From those old methods came the giving of value points for the pieces and the learning of good and have to know openings. Well, let me give an example of how that wrong approach can shape your chess thinking in a wrong way. So, although an experienced player will play other moves in this example, but for a novice player, those are very logical moves. His thinking is based on what he just has learned. So look at the diagram and what was played. It started with e2, e4, e7, e5, bishop, from f1 to c4, d7, d6, d2, d4, knight goes to from g8 to a7, and then white takes d4, takes e5. And now we will take a closer look at the moves and then the thoughts behind them, based on the traditional way of learning chess. e2, e4. White occupies the center with the pawn. It's a good move. The center is very important, and whether you occupy it with a pawn or a piece, it's a matter of taste. Black answers with e7, e5, and he does the same, and that's also a good response. 2. Bishop f1 to c4, and here we see the difference in thinking. The traditional trained player immediately thinks, that's the Italian opening, because the bishop went to c4. If it had gone to b5, it would have been the Spanish opening, the difference between pizza and paella. The based on understanding trained player immediately thinks, with that move, white attacks pawn f7. And that's a weak pawn because it's only protected by the king. In fact, that the traditional trainer player does not see this as a problem is because the bishop attacks the pawn. And the bishop is worth 3 points and the pawn only 1 point. So that's not a threat. 2. d7, d6. That seems a strange move, but it isn't. Because the traditional player trained with black remembers very well the first moves of the French and the Caro-Kann openings, and they are e2, e4, and then e7, e6. That's the French. And then the next move he will play d7, d5 to attack the white center pawn on e4. The Caro-Kann is doing almost the same moves, but instead of e6 it's plays c6, and again followed by d7, d5 to attack the pawn on e4. These are a very aggressive way of playing, but some beginners they prefer to play very defensively, and there's nothing wrong with that. So with d7, d6, as in the French and the Caro-Can, a pawn played on the 6th row to support a pawn on the 5th row. But in this situation, not to attack the pawn on e4, but to defend his own pawn on e5. The game continues. d2, d4. White now occupies the center with 2 pawns and attacks black's pawn on e5. But this is already defended, so black continues to prepare the castling. And he plays the knight from g8 to e7. The idea behind this move is that after the exchange on e5, black will play this knight to g6 to defend the pawn on e5 again. Later, he can defend the same pawn once more by playing knight b8 to c6. In itself, there's a good idea behind this. If one of the knights is attacked and has to move away, the pawn on e5 is still well defended by the other knight. But now white plays d takes e5. And now we in a situation that we already explained in the previous video. When we play chess, we do not overlook constantly the entire board. We are completely focused on what we think is important at the board. In this situation, for the player with black, important is what is happening in the center with his pawn on e5. And therefore he only sees that part of the board. So the blue part is what the players see. And therefore it's completely logical to play d6 takes e5 after white has taken the e5 pawn. And now white's answer is coming as a complete surprise. And it does happen often, even in games from players that aren't beginners anymore. Bishop takes the weak pawn on f7. Look at the diagram. By capturing with the pawn from d6, the white pawn on e5 did open the d file, with the result that the white queen on d1 can capture the black queen on d8. Fortunately, it's defended by the king. The problem is that the king also has to defend the pawn on f7. And when a piece has to defend 2 different things, that often goes wrong. It is the opposite of the extra defense that we saw in the 3rd move. And in this case, unfortunately, the king has to capture the bishop on f7, because that gives check and there is no other place to go for the king. And moves that give check are very compelling and have priority. So the king has to capture the bishop, and white captured the unprotected queen on d8, and the game is lost. So the answer to the question why the player with black lost the game is not that difficult. I already indicated that he did not see the threat of capturing on f7 as a possibility, because it's a bad exchange in terms of points. In addition, the player has learned the first move of famous openings. He has stored them in his memory in the file games that start with e4. If white then plays the bishop to c4, this leads to the Italian game, and if the bishop goes to b5, then it becomes the Spanish game. This means that those moves are stored in our memory based on the names of those openings. Using the traditional methods, a beginning player learns the names of most popular openings and their first move. You then automatically classify them based on those names, even if they say nothing or little about the idea behind those openings. That is how our brain works. And when we remember something, this process is based on the classification, on how we have stored it. Anyone who has learned to think after bishop c4, aha, this is Italian, so not Spanish, will then search its memory in the section Italian openings. And because this opening comes after e2, e4, there are several openings that are parked there, and the ones he knows will come all up in his memory. All very interesting, but in fact not really related to what is happening on the board right now. However, anyone who has learned to think after bishop to c4 that the bishop attacks through a weak square f7 will search in his memory in the section attacks on f7 and will find very diverse examples of that. Later after your game, you will add the experience that you have gained with this game to that group. while the other person will store that experience in the Italian games section. There are various openings where white plays bishop c4, looking at the pawn on f7. And if you want to be able to use the experience of one opening in the other opening, then it's very important that after the move bishop c4, you immediately search your memory for the thread bishop c4 takes pawn f7, and not for the Italian opening or whatever. So another disadvantage of the classical training is that you're immediately made to play an opening based on the move sequence that you remember. In practice, it turns out that people do remember the move sequences, but only very vaguely why certain moves have to be played. Memorizing move sequences is much easier with just the moves than when you also have to remember all the thoughts behind them. There are just too many of them. So it's an accounting approach, and although it does lead to good results in the beginning, but you will lose that advantage fairly quickly after a few games and have been played against players who knows why they play as they play. So the reason I pay so much attention to this is because over the years I've seen so many children and adults drop out after things were going in the beginning very good, and then suddenly there's no more progress. So they thought they were not smart enough. Well, it's just their memory is simply not well organized. That is why it's best to take your time for the start and think calmly before you make a move. And what should you think about then? I hope to help you with that in this video. So when the game starts, all your pieces are still neatly in place. If you have white, you have to start, and the question is with what? The answer for the beginner player is very simple. If you like a somewhat wild attacking way of playing, play e2, e4. If you prefer to start a bit more quietly, play d2, d4. With both moves you occupy the center, you create space on your half, and you free one of the bishops. Those are three things you do in a single move. That's efficient play. For your first game, the best is to play e2, e4 and go straight for the king's attack. The goal for chess is to checkmate the opposite king. That's something you have to practice, and don't be afraid to lose. If you play with black, your first move is determined by what white play. But whether it will be a wild or a quiet game depends on your answer. If white has played a pawn in the center, choose to either play one of your pawns in the center or to attack that pawn. However, for a beginner player, it's probably a good idea to block that pawn. So after e4, you play e7, e5, while after d4, you play d7, d5. With those answers, you block the opposite pawn, you put your own pawn in the center, and you too free one of your bishops. Then it's up to white to decide how the game will continue. He can then choose to continue developing calmly, usually first the knights and then the bishops. And to decide where the knight goes, you have to think logically. If you play a knight to the edge, to the A or half file, then the knight has far fewer possibilities than when you put the knight on the C or F line. And what is it doing on the edge? So it's not defending or attacking anything, except when you play the knight to the H line, because then it defends the weak pawn on the F line. Yeah, there's only one problem. If it is in line of the opposite, it is in line of the opposite bishop, the one who is on the queen side. So when your opponent take your knight that is standing on the H line, you have to take back with the pawn, the G pawn, and that means that you got a double isolated pawn while the knight isn't there anymore to defend the weak pawn on the F line. So white can also immediately attack your pawn in the center, which often happens by sacrificing a pawn, which we call a gambit. As a beginning player, it's good to play a lot of gambits and to tackle a gambit. So take that pawn with black. But if another pawn is sacrificed, then it's usually not wise to take that one too. The reason is that while you are busy taking pawns, the opponent develops his pieces and gets a lot of space to attack. By playing gambits, you will lose a lot of games, but by analyzing them afterwards, you will learn a lot. And perhaps the most famous gambit is the King's Gambit. After e2, e4, e7, e5, white plays f2, f4, and black takes the pawn on f4. That's the accepted King's Gambit. When black does not capture the f-pawn but plays something else, it's the declined King's Gambit. There are many thousands of games that have been played with both possibilities, and sometimes white one and sometimes black one. I personally find it one of the most fun openings for beginning players. You are immediately in a real chess game. Every move has a clear reason. It's an attacking or a defensive move, and you see immediately the result. This diagram shows that white has the center, but at the expense of the safety of his king. Black threatens to give check with queen from d8 to h4, and playing the pawn g2 to g3 doesn't help much. Just try it. To prevent this check, white can play, for example, the knight to f3. Then the queen can no longer come to give check on h4, and white has developed a piece. But that check remains possible, and that knight on f3 cannot anywhere for the time being. So h4 is also played. It also prevents the queen coming to h4, but then you do not develop pieces, and a possible short castling to bring the king to safety becomes almost impossible. So white can also play on this third move, the bishop to c4, from f1 to c4, is very sharply, because now the black queen can come to h4 and to give check. And that will be a really very exciting game. Who will find the best attacking moves and who will find the best defending moves? If you can play against someone very often, same person, you can play this opening hundreds of times, sometimes with white, sometimes with black, and try out all the variations. Of course, you have to think a lot, but the problems are very concrete. After you have been playing this opening several times, you become familiar with these typical problems and possibilities. And that's a good moment to see on the internet how others were solving those problems. So it's very different with first learning some moves and then start to play, or first start to play and then discover yourself the problems and then you do some research. Meanwhile, with a close game, as we will see in the next example, thinking is very different, because there are usually lesser direct threats, so whether you play a good or lesser move, that will take some time before that comes clear. No matter how you play, the game develops further, and especially when you have played calmly, you might up in a position like this one. And now, what do we look for then? It's important to analyze, not based on what is good or what is bad. We try to make only an inventory to the situation and possibilities. The reason is that the moment we start making value judgment, and at a value is something other than a possibility, we automatically start to find that aspect more important and interesting than other things. And then we can get so caught up in that we don't see that but the other opponent can also simply checkmate us with a simple move, as we saw in the first game. So with this game, I just want to show some possibilities of how you can analyze a game. A good analysis of positions takes time. That is why you always have to make a good time schedule when you're playing with a time limit. And that means that you have enough time left for the next move. But when you have analyzed a position well, you can play much faster afterwards. The most important thing you still have to do is to always look at the entire board again. Has something changed? Has a piece suddenly gained more or other possibilities? Well, chess is a mind sport and thinking takes time. So we start with looking closely at the positional situation across the board, without drawing conclusions. We look at how we and our opponent have developed. Where are the pieces? On which squares? And we see that white still has a queen and black no longer has one. White has two half open lines, one for the rook and one for the queen. The queen has a lot of freedom of movement. Black has a half open line for the rook and two half open line diagonal lines, and those are controlling by the bishop pair. Then we look at the center. Who controls the center and how? Well, black has most of the pieces focused on the center. For white, only the queen covers the center. Then comes the question, where is the king? Is it safe and well defended? And here immediately we see the big difference. Almost all black pieces are focused on the white king's position, and white's rook is only facing the line next to the black king. Next there is the question, what is a pawn structure? Are there possible weaknesses or not? You can best judge this mentally removing all the pieces, and then you get this situation. Black has a vast majority of connected pawns on the queen side. Connected means pawns that support each other. Maybe I should first give some example of pawn structures. In this diagram we see isolated pawns on the A and the C files. Black king can easily capture both of them. The black pawns on the F and G files are connected, and the white king cannot capture them because if he captures the G pawn, the F pawn will walk away to promote. We see another special situation on the D and the E files. The pawn on the D file is called a backward pawn because if black plays it, it is simple captured. Black does have a pawn majority, but it does not help. We saw in an earlier video how the battle between the two kings and a free pawn goes. The kings are not always nearby, but there is a rule of the square. And here we see that situation. If the king, in this case the black king, is in the square, he's in time to capture the pawn before it promotes. If the king is not in the square, the king can no longer catch up that pawn. Well, in our example position, we see that black is clearly much better in terms of pawn structure in our game. Our next question that we normally ask is, who has the initiative? Do you always react to the opponent's moves, or is it the other way around? However, has the initiative can cause problems with every new move, and problems has to be solved before we can answer with a problem or not a problem. And how are the pieces of the person who has the initiative positioned? For example, when he plays an attacking move on the king side, are yours and his pieces on that king side already developed? And can the other pieces easily get there? The answer determines how you should react to those moves. If you do not see a direct threat and the other pieces cannot get there quickly, then you do not have to react immediately. But you do have to check whether your defense pieces are positioned well. So let's look again to this position of our game. We see that almost all black pieces are focused on the king's position. Blacks also treat to attack the white king's position even more by playing pawn h4 to h3. After this, black threatens to take on g2, and that pawn is then attacked 3 times and only defended twice. Well, is that bad? Well, that's a question. Black must then move his queen so that he can bring later his white bishop to a safety after possible pawn h3 takes pawn g2. And this is the position that arises after h4, h3. And then queen goes to d3, the pawn h3 takes pawn g2, and the bishop goes from f1 to e2. And now when we look at the diagram, and this doesn't look very good for white. Another pawn down, and the king can't move anymore because of the pawn on the second rank. How can white prevent black from playing his pawn to h3? Of course, by blocking that pawn with h2, h3. That seems like a good move, but it's weakening of the king's position, because suddenly the g3 square becomes available for the black knight, after which it can capture the bishop on f1 while it was there to defend the pawn on g2. So let's see what that position looks like. White cannot capture the knight because of the bishop of b6. The white queen does not have many squares to go. Let her go to d3, then she still protects the bishop on f1. But black captures the bishop on f1 anyway on the next move. Because if black succeeds in exchanging the pieces, he's better off because of his superior pawn structure. It is interesting and instructive to look at the different possibilities. What if the king captures the knight? What if the white queen captures the knight? Or what if the rook captures the knight? In almost all cases, black will capture the pawn on g2 with his bishop. And you can give your variations in the comments. Thank you. But the question is whether h2, h3 was the only possibility in this position. Let us look again and ask ourselves which pieces are there and what their possibilities and functions are. So we look back at the original diagram and now we see that the pressure on the white king's positions is enormous because of that bishop pair. And we also see a white rook there. What is it actually doing? I think in my previous video I already referred to the question of former world champion Michael Town about the value of a rook when it's not being used while you are being checkmated. The only thing the rook is doing here is that it is on the line of the black bishop that is treating the g2 pawn. That bishop is very active and treating while the rook doesn't do much. What if we take that bishop? What does the position look like then? So if black takes the rook with pawn c7, the white queen can take the pawn on e6, and then there's not much left of the beautiful black pawn structure. If the king takes the rook, white can either immediately take the pawn on b4 with checks, or he can give check with the queen, and then he also wins a pawn in the end. It's certainly not an easy game. But before the white rook took the black bishop, white's pieces were very passive, while black's were very active. After the capture, it's the other way around. So if you like defensive play, you let black attack and wait for your chance. If you like active play, you sacrifice the quality and in return you get the initiative and a pawn. And however, has the initiative determines the game. So after you have decided which move you are going to play, it remains very important to look very carefully over the entire board after each move and before you play your move. There's a simple method for this. Very often you see players make a move and then they write it down. That's the wrong order. You should first write down the move, then put down your pencil and calmly look at the whole board again. What will it look like after you have played your move? Evaluating your move before executed will help you to avoid a lot of losing games. And it's a technique that will also pay off in other areas. It will cost you a lot of extra time in the beginning, but it will become automatic and it prevents you from having to spend a lot of time finding an answer to your opponent's counter move that you hadn't overlooked. In my previous video, I already said that my own games are very boring. The one who played the complete opposite was former world champion Michael Town. Anyone who wants to learn chess should play and replay as many of his games as possible. Below this video is a link to one of his games with a very clear and instructive explanation. Toll was called the Magician of Riga. He was what people described as a creative genius with a completely unpredictable improvisations. He's considered one of the most influential players in chess history because of his attacking and daring combinatorial style. He has also many beautiful statements, such as the one that fits my vision on giving points to the piece. Like he said, you must take your opponent into deep dark forest where 2 and 2 is 5 and the path leading out is only wide enough for 1. So and now you may ask, if you are not allowed to give points, how do you judge the pieces? Well, the value of the pieces change during the game. We saw this before. A pawn in the starting position on the second and the seventh row is not worth that much. Although if they are protecting the king, they are usually worth more than pawns on the other wing in that position. However, a pawn that is advanced very far has become increasingly valuable. As an example, this last game in this series. It was played between two former world champions, Botwinnik and Casablanca, in 1938. It seems that black has positioned himself well, with the queen on the blocking square of the white free pawn. It's a free pawn because no black pawns can stop it. At first glance, one might think that white can somehow play the bishop to g5 and thus pin the knight on the queen. When black plays that knight, the white bishop will take the black queen. We will talk more about pinning at the end of this video. For now, what will be the use of that pinning? White doesn't have another piece to increase the pressure. Botwinnik knows the value of the free pawn, so he starts with a sacrifice to get the queen off the blocking square, and he positioned his bishop to r3. Black queen takes the bishop, and now white is going to destroy the black king's position with another sacrifice, knight h5 check. That white knight cannot be captured with the black knight because that is pinned on the king. Stepping aside with the king does not help either. If he goes to f8, then the queen will take the black knight with check, and when the king goes to g8, then the white knight takes the black knight on f6 also. Those are always compelling moves. Just try yourself. But that is why black captured the knight on h5 with his pawn. Next, queen gives check on g5, and now the king is captured with check. After king h8, it is checkmate in 2 moves, and after king f8 is checkmate in 3 moves. All thanks to the free pawn, and Casablanca resigned after the knight gives check on h5. Due to the lack of space, there was a good square available, no good square available for the black queen. Instead of taking the bishop on a3, the queen could also have gone to e8 for the example. A queen could go from e5 to c7 and give check. The king then can go to g8, after which white play his bishop to e7 to attack the black knight. And as soon as the knight moves, white queen can go to d7 and it's over. Or the king goes to, after queen c7, to h6, after which white immediately play, for example, bishop e7 also. And well, you can look for yourself how it might go on. It's very interesting to find out the winning moves. To conclude this series, I would like to show something about the open and half open lines and the pinning of pieces. Thanks to the open and half open lines, the rook can become very active. They allows the rook to go easily to the other side of the board. They also give the interesting pinning possibilities. And in this diagram we see 3 examples. The parts that are characteristic for a pinning are called the head piece and the tail piece. The head piece is usually the rook, but there can also be an open diagonal line where the head piece is then the bishop or the queen, while the tail piece is usually the king. First of all, we have the common pin. In the diagram we see that the black knight on a6 cannot move because then the king on a8 will be in check. White can play now b4, b5, and the next move capture the knight with that pawn. In addition, we see in the center an example of a discovery check. Black can play bishop d2 to c3, after which the white king must save himself because of the rook on d7. And after that, the black bishop can capture the white rook on a1. As a third example, there is the X-ray situation. It took me some puzzling to get all 3 of them into the diagram, but I think it all fits well. So it looks like a discovery check where the head piece is the black rook on h7 and the tail piece is the white queen on h3, but that's not the situation. The tail piece is the rook on h2. After the bishop takes the knight on f3, the queen captures the bishop on f3, and then the black rook captures the white rook on hard too. So, and that's it. And now you can get started yourself. On the internet you can find loads of games that show you how you can win with very few moves. Don't try to remember those moves, but try to find out the principle of the attack and where it went wrong for the losing player. Well, it's often because they have no sense of a sacrifice. And a sacrifice is when you exchange a piece that is worth 5 points for a piece that is only worth 3 or even 1 point. From an accountant point of view, it's irresponsible, so they do not have to think about that possibility, and they don't do that. In short, replay those games, try to understand what is attack and how they handle it. A good way is to try out some better defending moves. When did it went wrong? With the last move, or the second to last move, or when? And gain a lot of experience with sacrificing by playing gambits. And I just read an interview with Grandmaster Anish Giri, one of the strongest players today, and he said, computers are stronger than ever. They have reached a level that is unattainable for humans. The human brain has its limitation. You simply cannot remember everything. That is why it's sometimes tempting to let go of the theory and trust your intuition. And that trend will change the game again. And I agree completely with that. That vision of the future fits perfectly with my vision, that it's much more interesting to invent your own openings than to imitate those of others. So have fun with it, and who knows, maybe we see you in Da Nang. Hang up,